Why does competitive Donkey Kong get a reference in this episode? Was Higgins right to talk to Beard about his concerns about Jane? And which cast member pulled off a remarkable football achievement when filming this episode? We'll be discussing these questions and more in this video. Welcome to Square Eyes, a channel where we recap, review and take a sideways look at your favourite TV shows. This video will be taking a look at the 6th episode of Season 2 of Ted Lasso, called The Signal. I'll be recapping the main things that happened, giving you my thoughts, picking out my favourite line, talking about any interesting trivia I've found, and looking ahead to the future episodes. Let's jump straight in. The episode opens with AFC Richmond winning a game, and everyone seems to be happy, a massive turnaround from their early season form. Then we cut to a studio, where Ian Wright suggests that Richmond's improvement has mostly been down to adding Roy Kent to the coaching team. They also mention that they'll be facing a tough game in the FA Cup at the weekend, when they face Tottenham Hotspur. Rebecca has had Luca to stay over at her house. He's the guy she met on the dating app called Tumescent. I'll let you look up what that word means. It's obvious that their relationship has been based on more physical attraction, as Luca seems a bit dim. There's nothing wrong with basing a relationship on physical attraction, but Rebecca must be wanting something a bit more though, as she's still messaging the mystery man on Banter, the app that encourages communication over surface looks. Luca and Rebecca's morning is interrupted when her mother arrives unannounced in her kitchen. She's left Rebecca's father because she doesn't feel like he listens to her or respects her, so she wants to make a change. Rebecca seems completely shocked, but Luca, perhaps not understanding he shouldn't be involved, backs up Rebecca's mum, despite the fact he stood naked in Rebecca's kitchen. Ted breezes his way through the stadium in the morning, saying hello to all the staff and having little chats with them. When he comes to Dr. Sharon, he does the same thing with her, but she ends by suggesting that he might want to make an appointment and talk more seriously with her. He brushes the offer aside, but I got the feeling she really wants him to come and see her for therapy. As the coaches are talking about the upcoming cup game, Beard mentions that his on-again, off-again relationship with Jane is now on again. Everyone offers mumbled and insincere congratulations that they've reconciled, because they're aware of how bad the two are for each other. Higgins is the only one to speak up and question whether it's a wise choice. When Beard leaves the room to call Jane, Higgins calls a meeting with 3 other Diamond Dogs to express his disappointment with Ted and Nate for not backing him up. Ted stands by his decision not to speak out, having had bad experiences in the past when he's been critical of a friend's partner. Nate's father had talked his first true love out of being in a relationship with him when he was in year 4, so while Higgins obviously wasn't happy about being left on his own, the other two had valid reasons for not getting involved, even if Beard may be destined to be unhappy in his relationship with Jane. On the training pitch, Roy is dispensing advice to the players in between the routines, and it's making a real difference. But he doesn't have any advice or suggestions for Jamie Tartt, possibly because he's still carrying a grudge from their rivalry when he was a player at AFC Richmond. It's also worth noting that while the players are loving having Roy Kent on the training pitch, Nate is still looking less than happy to have another coach on board. He made several jealous glances at Roy when he was giving advice to the players, despite the fact that Roy was giving constructive feedback to the team when all Nate was doing was shouting insults at them. Jamie comes into Ted's office and tells the other coaches they should tell Roy to start coaching him. Ted explains that Roy is not the kind of person who will respond well to being told what to do, so instead he asks Keeley for advice on how to deal with the situation. She suggests to Jamie that he tries agreeing with everything he says, as that takes the sting out of his anger. Ted, Keeley, Rebecca and her mum all go to the Crown and Anchor for lunch. Rebecca's mum has Keeley and Ted hanging on her every word as she tells them the story of how she walked out on Rebecca's father. Rebecca is less impressed, as she says her mother leaves her father on a regular basis and is always tempted back by an expensive, environmentally conscious gift. Beard and Jane have a FaceTime conversation, and their chat confirms that their relationship seems pretty unhealthy, with Beard saying he'd throw himself off a cliff if she ever left him again, and she saying she'd lay down at the bottom of the cliff for him to land on her. Then she mentions she's going to a cafe to meet an underwear model friend, so he can talk through some issues he's having. Beard then ends the chat and makes an excruciating pain noise, which is presumably from jealousy. Higgins hears the whole interaction through the window of his temporary office setup, and his worry for his friend deepens. Elsewhere in the training ground, Jamie tries to put Keeley's advice into practice by agreeing with everything Roy says. It quickly fails when Roy works out what he's doing and gets him to admit that he's an ugly boy with bad hair. Roy's bad behaviour makes Jamie lose his cool, and their argument draws Ted out of his office. With some prompting from Ted, Roy eventually does coach Jamie by explaining that he's lost his edge because Ted's made him soft. Ted is shocked by Roy's words, but it actually makes sense, because Ted has made Jamie selfless and team-focused, but as a striker you also have to be greedy and self-centred, which Jamie previously was. For Jamie to improve, he has to let loose the nastier parts of his personality, though to Jamie's disappointment, he has to channel it at certain moments for the benefit of the team, rather than doing it all the time like he used to. Roy says he'll give him a signal when he can unleash his inner idiot. Rebecca is still using her dating apps and is messaging both Luca and her mystery man on Banter. Then her mother says that she won't be joining her for that day's game because she's going to a book reading, but promises to make her tea later. Rebecca looks disappointed, but masks it. Then we get to the game between AFC Richmond and Tottenham Hotspur. With the scores tied after half an hour, the coaches give Jamie the signal, and he's delighted to be able to get back to his old self for a little while. Just like he's been instructed, Jamie winds up one of the Spurs players, draws him into a foul, and then scores a beauty of a goal from the resulting free kick. In true Jamie Tartt fashion, he gives the signal back to the bench to celebrate his goal. At half-time, Higgins talks to Rebecca about how he wants to talk to Beard about his relationship with Jane and how it seems doomed to fail. Rebecca echoes the advice that Ted and Nate gave him earlier, saying he shouldn't get involved because nobody's ever grateful for that kind of advice about their romantic partners. Rebecca explains her reasoning using her parents as an example, which is topical given her mum's just left her dad, but it sounds like their relationship has been strained since her childhood. As the second half kicks off, we see things from Ted's perspective, and he's in some sort of sensory overload, with the crowd noise, shouting players, and general stress of the match day seem to be getting on top of him. We get confirmation of this when the camera zooms in on Ted's twitching fingers, which happened in the last season just before his panic attack. Beard can tell something's not right and checks in with Ted. He says he's got a problem with his stomach and runs down the touchline and into the changing room. Spurs score an equaliser shortly after Ted's exit, and it means that the bench need to think up a strategy for the rest of the game. Beard asks Roy what they should do, but Nate decides he is going to take charge of the situation. He spits onto the sidelines, then strides forward, makes a triple substitution, and confidently issues instructions to the team to park the bus. This means he wants them to just defend and do everything they can to stop Spurs from scoring. It seems like a counterintuitive strategy when they need a goal, but they're up against a stronger opponent, so focusing on defence will mean they're able to stay in the game for longer. Beard questions what Nate is doing, but he just waves him away. Rebecca tries to find Ted, but he's nowhere to be seen. She just finds a jacket on the floor of the changing room. Then suddenly the changing room is full of celebrating players. Nate's tactics work, and they scored a winner on the counter-attack. Rebecca tries to congratulate Roy and give him the credit for the win, but Roy makes it clear that it was Nate's quick thinking after Spurs' equaliser that led to the win. With Ted nowhere to be seen, Nate takes on the media duties after the game and seems to enjoy the limelight a little too much. In the car park, when everyone is going home, Higgins talks to Beard about his concerns over his relationship with Jane. As everyone suggested to Higgins, Beard isn't receptive to his advice, but he does give him a big hug to show his gratitude for the concern his friend showed for him. Nate is scrolling through social media, searching the hashtag CoachNate to see what people are saying about him, and it's all positive stuff about being a wonder kid. Then Roy Kent comes in and tells him well done too, so it's been a good day at the office for Nate. Rebecca tries to call Ted because she's still worried about him, but gets no answer, so leaves him a voicemail. In the message, she also mentioned that she could do with a pep talk because she's going to have a difficult talk with her mother. She needn't have worried though, as her mother wasn't there when she got home, as she'd gone back to her father. The note she'd left Rebecca said that he'd bought her a Tesla and said sorry, so she'd taken him back. Despite the fact this is exactly what Rebecca predicted would happen when she was in the Crown and Anchor earlier in the episode, she still seems gutted that her mother had done it again. Rebecca's phone flashes up with a new message from her mystery man on Banter. Only it isn't a mystery for us anymore, because we see the sender of the message in the next shot. It's Sam Obisanya, who's in the back of a taxi with Colin and Isaac. This feels like it should have been the last scene of the episode, but there's one more. Dr. Sharon goes back to her office to drop off some files, and she finds Ted curled up on her sofa. He's looking in a bad way, and he tells her that he wants to make an appointment. This was another great episode of Ted Lasso. We saw all the big storylines moved along, but there was still plenty of jokes, a football game to enjoy, and a huge reveal too at the end of the episode when we saw who Rebecca's mystery man was. I thought it was interesting that they chose this game for Ted's anxiety to come back, as AFC Richmond were ahead at the point it flared up, and things were actually going okay for Ted at that point. This seems fairly realistic to me, as anxiety isn't always predictable, and it wouldn't naturally follow that he would only get anxiety attacks because his team were doing badly. My impression was that Ted just found the sensory input from being in the stadium overwhelming and had to leave. While it's not good that Ted had this experience, I think it's good to show this sort of condition in a programme like this to normalise it, and to not make it a plot device or a lazy piece of character development. All season, Ted's been very cautious around Dr. Sharon, after a bad experience with a marriage counsellor in the past, but he now seems he's willing to accept her help, so perhaps they'll be able to work on his issues together. Speaking of issues, Beard's relationship still seems to be a complete disaster, and I'm pleased that Higgins was brave enough to say something to him. It obviously didn't make any difference to Beard, but at least Higgins can now know he's done everything he can to protect his friend from being hurt again. This storyline felt very relatable to me. I've seen friends have tempestuous relationships and had to decide whether to speak my mind or bite my tongue. I'm sad to say, when I've been in that situation, I've tended not to be as brave as Higgins. Rebecca's mum was a bit of a disappointment, as Rebecca seemed to be looking forward to having her around, and then came home to a note saying that she'd gone again, just like Rebecca had predicted. Some people can change, she can't, just like Rebecca said. In more positive news for Rebecca, we now know she's been flirting with Sam over the last few episodes, even though she doesn't. Yet. It will be interesting to see how they handle the information coming out. Obviously there's a massive age gap and a huge power imbalance, and if the genders were reversed, you may be a bit concerned about whether it will be a potential Me Too kind of situation. So it's a relationship that'll need to be dealt with delicately by the writers, but I'm interested to see where it goes. Someone completely lacking in delicacy is Jamie Tartt. It was nice to see him recapture some of the qualities that make him the player and person that he is. I'll not use the language that Roy Kent used to describe him, but yes, it really is one of them, and it helped the team to win the game. The fact that Roy Kent could see what the problem was with Jamie and helped him to channel his selfish instincts in a way that benefited the team shows exactly why it was a great idea to have him join the team as a coach. It was also nice to see that he didn't take Rebecca's praise for the win after the game, instead making sure that Nate got the praise for his work. He also went out of his way to find Nate after the game and give him a well done. It's pretty obvious that Nate is jealous of Roy, but that only seems to go one way, and if anything, Roy's been very generous towards Nate in this episode. It was interesting that Nate was the one to step up and take charge in Ted's absence. I found it very revealing that the moment before he issued his instructions he spat, just like he spat into the mirror in the Greek restaurant in the last episode. This seems to be his way of building up his confidence. I found Nate's explanation for his strategy quite revealing too. He wanted the team to be negative because he knew they needed a goal too, and as long as Richmond didn't concede a goal, human nature would mean that the other team would screw up eventually and they could exploit that. It seemed a very negative and bleak way of looking at the game, but Nate does seem to be one of the most negative and pessimistic characters in Ted Lasso, which is an otherwise uplifting and optimistic show. My favourite line in this episode came from Ted when he said, "I love meeting people's mums. It's like reading an instruction manual on why they're nuts." Sometimes my favourite lines are funny and sometimes they're profound, but in this case it's a little bit of both. Early in the episode we hear Liam in the office's laugh. This is a callback to a conversation Higgins and Rebecca had in the Lavender episode, where they made fun of his laugh, when Higgins said he didn't want to sit near him because it was too annoying. I think he's got a point too. When Ted bumps into Roy and Keeley in the corridor, Roy says he's going to call HR, and Ted says, "Tell Mr. Puff and stuff I said hello," and follows it by saying it was a joke for people born in the early to mid-70s. As someone who was born in the early 80s, I had to Google this reference, and I found out he was referring to a TV show called HR Puff and Stuff. I watched a bit of it on YouTube, and it made absolutely no sense, even you account for the fact that things were done differently back then. The programme looks like someone's bad cheese dream turned into a reality, but I will concede the theme tune is amazing, so I'd recommend you look it up if you're curious. Ted talks about David versus Goliath matchups in his office and references Steve Weeble and Billy Mitchell. This refers to the competitive Donkey Kong arcade scene back in the early 2000s. This might sound like a ridiculously obscure reference, but there's actually a popular documentary about this rivalry, and I'd seen it before and I'd strongly recommend it if you've not seen it. It's called The King of Kong. Beard's example of a David versus Goliath matchup is Pearl Jam versus Ticketmaster. This refers to a battle between the band and the ticket company in 1994, when Pearl Jam became angry about the ticket sellers' service charges. The dispute ended up with Pearl Jam cancelling their summer tour of 1994, and the US Justice Department opened up an investigation into Ticketmaster. The investigation was ultimately dropped though, and whenever I buy tickets these days they still have ridiculous extra charges added on, so I guess Pearl Jam ultimately lost the battle, but fair play to them for fighting it anyway. After a few episodes without one, we get to see another of Beard's books in the office. This time he's reading one called Football Against the Enemy by Simon Cooper, which won the William Hill Book Award in 1994 and covers the author's travels across 22 different countries, where he looks at how football is played differently in each place and how it affects the culture and politics in each location. It sounds like a good read, and I've added it to my list of books I want to check out. Phil Dunster, the actor who plays Jamie Tartt, really did score the free kick for the first goal in this game. The editing has the strike cut into 3 different shots, which will make it easy to fake the goal going in, but apparently this wasn't needed because Dunster is a decent footballer and scored directly from the free kick during the shoot. Brendan Hunt, the actor who plays Coach Beard, shared a raw recording of the free kick on Twitter, and it really was a beautiful free kick. Rebecca's mother's note suggests microwaving her shepherd's pie for 2 minutes. Unless Rebecca owns some super duper military grade microwave, that won't be nearly long enough and she's risking food poisoning. Things are really starting to hot up with this season now, and there are lots of storylines that are all getting quite exciting at the same time. Firstly, there's Sam and Rebecca's relationship, which I don't even realise they're having with each other yet. It'll be interesting to see how long they spend communicating through the app. Now that we as viewers know, I hope it isn't too long before the characters find out too, though I doubt they'll be able to conduct a relationship in the open, as it would be difficult for a player and a club owner to openly date each other without there being messy complications. Then there's Ted's mental health situation that seems to have bubbled up again. We saw something similar in the Make Rebecca Great Again episode last season, but this time he's got the professional support of Dr. Sharon available to him, but he'll need to overcome his distrust of therapists. Nate and Roy's coaching careers seem to be a focus of attention this season too. Roy has more of a focus on motivating individual players and getting the best out of them, whereas Nate's skill seems to be more on tactics and systems. There's room for both to succeed in the team, but Nate doesn't seem to see it that way, so there could be a rivalry developing there, even though Roy seems to be more keen to build Nate up rather than compete with him. And of course there's the football to think about. Richmond are doing much better in the league now, so promotion back to the Premier League is a possibility, and they won an FA Cup quarter-final. This means they've got a semi-final to look forward to in the near future, with a place in the final on the line for the winner. With so much of the drama in Ted Lasso taking place off the pitch, it's easy to forget about the actual football. Thank you for watching my recap and review of episode 6 of season 2 of Ted Lasso. I'll be posting my video for episode 7 in the next few days, so please subscribe to make sure you don't miss it. Goodbye.